Well, and this is why I played the cut before you came on from Senator Durbin. I don't know, maybe you've met some of these guys, but my personal opinion, and having sat here in this chair for 17 years and listened to some of this, is that there are one or two conclusions that I can draw from people that promote things like Cash for Clunkers. Number one, either they are truly evil and sinister, and they know that this stuff just racks up debt, does not create wealth, and drives us further into the hole, and they do it anyways because it helps them get elected. Or number two, they don't know. They're economic illiterate, and I don't know which is more dangerous.
I think there's a little bit of both. I think also they remind me of what Lord Keynes said, who was the father of Keynesian economics. Right. They asked him what would happen in the long run, and he said, in the long run, we'll all be dead. He just didn't seem to care about the long run because it works in the short run. For example, if I print $1 billion like they're doing for the Cash for Clunkers, I pass it out, it works for a few months or even 6 months until people figure out, guess what? We now have twice as much money circulating, so maybe it's going to take twice as much money to buy my milk, my sugar, my coffee, my gasoline. But you're right, it's either a complete economic illiteracy or it's just that they don't care about the long run. They only care about what happens in the next week or two.
Now, one of your dad's favorite economists and one of mine, and I just love the cantankerous nature this man writes with, Gary North. Gary has written here, and I've quoted him many times on the air, he had written that in order to sustain the Obama budget and the stimulus spending, the federal treasury, or the treasury, has to disperse or has to collect from the economy $334 billion a month. Now, that was in May when Gary wrote that. $334 billion a month sucked out of the private economy is laundered through the money machine in Washington and then given back out to what are known as special interests, or however it is dispersed. How can a U.S. senator make a difference, just one? And I'm speaking with Rand Paul, who is a candidate for U.S. Senate in Kentucky. Rand, why don't you go ahead before you answer that question and give the folks out there who may want to contact you, may want to make a campaign donation or whatever, or just follow your campaign. What's the website?
Well, you can find us on randpaul2010.com, and we have a great website. It's actually put together by a couple of young kids out of California.
randpaul2010.com, you people. If you want to follow a candidate for the U.S. Senate, other than Senator DeMint, that may have actually read the Constitution, well, Rand is one. So just talk to me for a minute here about that $334 billion a month, and what in the wide world of sports could you possibly do once you were in the U.S. Senate to try and, speak some sense to that, or to at least, as Ronald Reagan once said, he got into politics to hold his hand up and say, stop, just stop. This was in 1960. What would you intend to do?
Well, I think what you have to do is you have to broadcast your message. You have to be steadfast. You have to be loud. You have to make noise. I would try to amend every appropriations bill. If we're 20% over budget or 30% over budget, I would amend every appropriations bill and say, here's the balanced budget amendment to your appropriations, reduce it by 25%, and that's sustainable with a balanced budget. But we can't sustain this. I mean, it is so tremendous. The deficit is going to consume us. And in many ways, I see us as sort of a latter-day Rome. I see us as Rome in 200, 250 A.D. when we're in sort of a long, slow decline. For many years, we've been able to sustain this because we print up the money, but then we buy more imports than we export, so that money goes overseas. I saw an interesting statistic the other day. Over half of all the dollar currency is overseas. The danger is if those dollars come home to roost, they will drive our prices through the roof. And that happens when foreigners become worried about our dollar, and they're becoming worried. There's already reports that the Chinese are beginning to buy gold as an asset as opposed to buying the U.S. dollar as an asset.
And when that happens, and then what you were talking about earlier is monetizing the debt. When the Treasury or when the Federal Reserve has to print the debt bond or the bonds that the Treasury is trying to sell, and I'm sure you saw the story last week that the Treasury released all these bonds, and they weren't able to sell but half of them. There were only half of them that were sold. So what happens to that?
Well, then they have to raise the interest rate they pay on them. They're paying very low interest rate. But as interest rates rise, it's also going to be the turmoil that prices will rise. And the interesting thing is, and this is really one of the best questions I think my dad has asked Bernanke in probably, the last year or two. Bernanke keeps saying, we have an exit strategy. We have a way to pull that money out of the economy if it gets overheated and inflation occurs. But my father asked him, what do you do if there's 15% price inflation but 0% growth and still high unemployment? Will they be able to pull money out at that point? What if it becomes 20% inflation and 0% growth? They'll be petrified to pull the money back out of the system, but it keeps exploding and exploding, and inflation will go through the roof. And there's a lot of emotionalism to this, too. It's not just all black and white mathematical science. When you saw the crash of 2008, who was the biggest promoter of panic? The federal government. They told us every day, if you don't pass this bailout, it'll be a disaster. And sure enough, they created their own self-prophecy in a stock market crash that was largely promoted by government panic.